Yes, plenty of sun, breezy, pleasant today, high 80.
A morning that changed everything, burned in our memory, breathed deep into our souls.
The federal government saying that the air was safe to breathe.
A day that keeps taking, a death count that keeps rising.
Michael Rourke Andrews.
But tonight on Currents News, the resilience that remains, unwavering and unshakable.
You know, they were the first responders of 9/11. They should have been recognized as American heroes.
Stories shared for the first time for a higher purpose. We pledge to never forget. But what about those who will never remember?
How do I talk to kids about the darkest day in U.S. history?
A new mission that's perhaps the most tolling, teaching the next generation about September 11th, 20 years later. For nearly 2 decades, we've heard the bell ring, and it returned us to that moment in time, September 11, 2001, the day that keeps on taking our lives, our health, our emotional and spiritual well-being. I'm Michelle Powers. Welcome to our special coverage of 9/11, 20 years later. We'll take a look back and bring you the inspiring stories of those who've risen above their suffering, not just on that fateful day, but everyone since. We start with a Manhattan law firm that's helping the victims of Ground Zero-related illnesses and is looking for others where the dust may still be lingering. Jessica Easthope has the story.
Federal government saying that the air was safe to breathe. We were never prepared for that. So, so there was no breathing protection.
Breathing in that dust has proved more deadly over the last 20 years than the terrorist attack itself. A truth Richard Allies knows all too well. He was a battalion chief coming off of a 24-hour shift at his firehouse in Canarsie when he jumped onto a rescue truck for a job that would define his life and career. A ride that took him to Ground Zero for 3 straight days. He says his Catholic faith carried him through. It kept him strong inside as he was weakened by the horrific sights and sounds. The air surrounding the wreckage had the same toxic pH level as Drano. Allies learned just how harmful it was when he was diagnosed with skin cancer.
The paper masks that we were using, they would clog up. You basically discarded that. So I kind of went, maskless pretty much for the first couple of days.
Allies now works at Barish and McGarry Law Firm, helping other survivors get the justice they deserve through the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund and World Trade Center Health Program.
Not a day goes by without one of my clients dying. It's truly heartbreaking.
Michael Barish, the managing partner at Barish and McGarry, defines a 9/11 survivor as anyone who lived or worked in downtown Manhattan following the attack. The firm still has 25,000 clients. Sadly, 1,500 have died from 9/11 related illnesses, including 68 different cancers. 80% of all 9/11 first responders have enrolled in the Victim Compensation Fund. But you didn't have to be running into the towers to get sick. Those running from them were just as susceptible.
We're coming down with the same illnesses. We're dying from the same illnesses. This is not just about first responders.
This anniversary, Allies and Barish and McGarry are encouraging survivors to look at their health within the scope of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. The day might live forever in their minds, but it doesn't have to live in their bodies. In Lower Manhattan, Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
If you or someone you know is suffering from 9/11 related symptoms, you can register for the Victim Compensation Fund and World Trade Center Health Program at vcf.gov. After 2 decades, 2 wars, and a sweeping Department of Homeland Security, the fears felt on that day never really went away because danger still remains. There's no specific threat leading up to this weekend's anniversary, but U.S. intelligence is warning that actors like Al-Qaeda and ISIS could exploit the date for propaganda purposes, to cause chaos, and to radicalize new recruits. Unanswered questions also still loom. While it's been 10 years since Osama bin Laden was killed, no one has ever been prosecuted for helping him carry out his evil plot. After months of delays at Guantanamo Bay, bin Laden's co-conspirators are back in court. Emily Druby explains the wheels of justice grind exceedingly slow.
Days before the somber 20th anniversary of 9/11, 5 of the alleged planners of the attack appeared in court for the first time in 18 months. The most famous, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, often called KSM, the accused lead plotter of the attacks that left nearly 3,000 Americans dead. The court appearance underscoring that 20 years after the attacks, this trial is still not over.
It's just one more example of how having this case at Guantanamo means a whole lot of issues that would not be in play if it were taking place anywhere else.
Family members of those killed on 9/11 were in attendance. The defendants wore traditional clothes provided to them by their lawyers. The charges dating back to 2012, 11 years after 9/11. They include terrorism, hijacking aircraft, conspiracy, and murder. The defense team argues interrogations tainted by torture done at so-called black sites should not be allowed as evidence. In the past, some victims' families have called for the death penalty.
It has to be the death penalty. It doesn't have to be an ugly death.
The proceedings have been delayed by all kinds of bureaucratic headaches and other issues. The latest among them, the COVID-19 pandemic. The trial likely won't begin until 2022. Emily Druby, Currents News.
KSM was charged in 2008, but Barack Obama put a pause on the trial when he became president. Obama was hoping to close Gitmo and try the remaining inmates in U.S. civil court, but he was met with political backlash. President Joe Biden hopes to succeed where Obama failed and close Gitmo. The Cuban prison facility was built the year after 9/11. Despite the delays, one 9/11 family member has never stopped her quest for accountability. She's looking for a peaceful alternative to the military solutions of the past 2 decades. Currents News' Jessica Easthope tells us it's a quest for justice, but not vengeance.
This is my favorite picture of Bill. Clearly he's out on the water, which he loved to
Over the last 20 years, Colleen Kellys has made it her mission to get justice.
I want to do right by my brother. I can't get to the other side until people have been held accountable for everything that's happened since then.
Her little brother Bill was at Windows on the World on September 11th, 2001. In the months that followed her horrific loss, Colleen found her grief mirrored in so many others. People who also lost someone and wanted the same thing she did.
On a walk for healing and peace, we met and became the best friends that you never wanted to know.
Together, they started Peaceful Tomorrows, an organization seeking nonviolence in the pursuit of justice for their loved ones.
Our mission really was think hard about ways to respond that would not continue cycles of violence.
Peaceful Tomorrows sent 9/11 families to Afghanistan to meet with people there who lost family members during Al-Qaeda's terror campaign. But Colleen can't help but remember the human loss she often felt was beyond her control. 2,977 people died in the terror attacks on 9/11. The war in Afghanistan claimed the lives of 2,400 U.S. service members and 50,000 Afghan civilians. More than 30,000 global war on terror veterans have died by suicide. And just hours before the war was declared over, an attack killed 13 service members and at least 90 Afghans.
This doesn't have to be a militaristic response all the time. And I know that sounds really naive. Certainly 20 years ago, that sounded incredibly naive. But looking back, it's not naive. It didn't work.
Throughout her work, Colleen has traveled to Guantanamo Bay, where 5 men have been charged for their involvement in the 9/11 terror attacks. She wants to see Guantanamo closed.
I have this quote on my refrigerator that justice will not come
until those who are not injured are as indignant as those who are.
Colleen stands firm in that viable, nonviolent alternatives exist.
I believe God wants a just world. I believe that God gives us as human beings, God's not going to do this for us, that God gives us the opportunity all the time to work towards justice.
Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
If you want to donate to Colleen's cause or become a member, you can visit peacefultomorrows.org. A man who ironically devoted his life to peace was in the center of the chaos on 9/11. His name was Father Michael Judge, but the history books know him by another name, Victim 0001. the first recorded casualty. He died surrounded by his friends, not priests, but brothers, other firefighters. To this day, the bravest still honor him, retracing his last steps. Emily Druby took that walk to remember.
Hundreds marching in silence, footsteps and color guard commands the only sounds. An eerie scene in such a loud city as this group honored the life of a Catholic priest and American hero, Father Michael Judge. Father James Hansen calls him a role model.
Father Michael Judge and what he did on September 11th is exactly what I think priests do. They lay their life down for their flock.
As an FDNY chaplain, on 9/11, Father Judge left St. Francis of Assisi Church in Manhattan for the Towers, providing comfort and prayers for New York's bravest. Sal Casano was with him.
We looked at each other and, a head nod to each other and said, it's going to be a tough day, Father Mike. I think we're going to need a lot more chaplains. But he just went about his business. He was going to shepherd all of us up to heaven one day. And that's what he was doing that day. He was taking care of his flock.
Father Judge gave his life for his flock after being injured at the site. His body was found and brought to St. Peter's Church. The Walk of Remembrance starts at St. Francis of Assisi near Penn Station with a Catholic Mass and the Rosary, explains walk organizer John Bates.
We say the Rosary, which is what Father Michael Judge was doing that morning in the Towers. We do that to honor him and, of course, honor Mary.
Then they walk almost 3 miles all the way down here to St. Peter's Church in the Financial District, making stops along the way, honoring the lives lost that day and also the lives lost to illnesses since. Marcher Bob Hickey was a lifelong friend. He still remembers finding out his friend was gone.
When I found out exactly how it happened, it was like I wasn't surprised. He's there helping people. He's there doing what he always did.
The walk started by another friend of Father Judge, NYPD Detective Stephen McDonald, paralyzed after being shot on the job, dying 30 years later from his injuries. No longer on this earth, but this, the memorial he created for his friend, is. In the Financial District, Emily Druby, Currents News.
If you missed that Remembrance Walk, don't worry. The Diocese of Brooklyn's tablet newspaper has cataloged other religious memorials you can visit this weekend. It's all part of their special 9/11 edition. There's a detailed pullout map of beautiful statues and monuments located across the diocese. There's also a reflection from the police chaplain who spent months at Ground Zero, and a special look back on how the tablet recorded history 20 years ago. Plus, the take of the next generation, children of first responders, carrying on the message to never forget. You can log on to thetablet.org for info on how to subscribe or pick up one at your parish this weekend. Still ahead on our special coverage.
It really does hit you harder, especially when they're round number or big number anniversaries.
They say time heals, but milestones have a way of making the memories flood back and overwhelm. How many are coping with marking 20 years since the worst day in U.S. history? And later, explaining that unforgettable day to those too young to remember. Even though 2 decades have passed, most people still and always will remember where they were on 9/11. Monsignor Robert Romano from Our Lady of Guadalupe, who is Assistant Chief Chaplain for the NYPD, is one of those people. Christine Persichetti spoke with him in the days leading up to this somber anniversary and asked him where he was on that fateful morning.
I was getting ready for a funeral. I had the radio on, and something came over the radio. I heard about a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. So I put on the television set, and I could see the flames and the devastation, and I said, this doesn't look like a little plane, because the first report was that it was a small plane.
Right.
So I immediately went downstairs, said the funeral, and while I was saying the funeral directors kept coming in and out of the church, something that they never do. And I said, something's wrong. And as I got to the back of the church, they told me that not only that the building was hit, but the second building was hit, and both had collapsed. And I said, I have to run. And when we got there, I said, what do you want me to do? And they said, go to the hospitals. So I made myself available, did blessings to the bodies, And then I went back to police headquarters, and there we set up a family center for people to come. There was no communication whatsoever.
Right.
The radios were out, the telephones were out, cell phones were out, regular cell phone. Electricity was out.
Sure.
But got to the police plaza, and families started to come in and waiting for their loved ones to come in. It was a very, very, very difficult day that day, you know, just right at the beginning, because people just didn't know where their loved ones were.
Right, they were hoping they were going to find them. I remember all the pictures up.
Yeah.
How did that day affect you physically and mentally?
It has been a part of my life for 20 years. I do suffer from post-traumatic stress, and it was because of the silence of the day. Believe it or not, with all the fire engines, all the police cars, sirens coming down there was very little sound because of all the particulate matter that was floating in there. Still to this day, when I go to bed at night, I have to have TV on. It goes off sometime in the middle of the night, but when I fall asleep, I just can't take that silence.
You need something in the background.
Yeah.
You know, we talk about the death toll that day. Nearly 3,000 were killed, but so many more have died from 9/11 related illnesses since then. And so your job is not done. Talk about ministering to the victims and their families, and how their faith has helped them.
The original day, 23 members of the New York City Police Department were killed. We worked with their families very closely. Many of the police officers that were killed were friends of mine. I wear a band for a police officer and his brother, a firefighter. They were both killed that day. The two sons of this family, and they lost both their sons. The police officer had baptized his baby on September 1st. September 11th, we were looking for him. It's been tough, but things start to change in the police department. Families become closer to us. But unfortunately now what we're seeing is the remnants of 9/11 20 years later. And it's not going to end. People say it's over, it's part of history. People are dying every single day. In the police department, since 9/11, we've had over 200 people die from 9/11 disease. But we don't know about the people that worked in the building that day. We don't know about the iron workers who worked there for those months after 9/11. So 9/11 is alive and well, and it rears its ugly head constantly.
And no matter how much time goes by, Monsignor Romano and so many others are still coping with the events of 9/11. But Christine Persichetti tells us this particular anniversary may be even harder.
It's one of those defining moments in time that changed the way that we think about the world.
The memories and the images of 9/11 are overwhelming for some.
It really does hit you harder, especially when they're round number or big number anniversaries.
It's called the anniversary effect, an increase in distress around a traumatic event. Ken Yeager, the director of the Stress, Trauma, and Resilience Program at Ohio State Wexner Medical Center, says this 9/11 anniversary may be even more troubling, especially with the turmoil in Afghanistan. If you're struggling to cope, Yeager says acknowledge those feelings. Talk to someone you trust.
All of these are naturally occurring emotions, and rather than trying to avoid them, it's probably more important to name them and to call them out.
With 9/11 and in any tragic situation, Yeager says using coping skills can help.
Taking a walk, giving yourself time to sit and take a few deep breaths until you work through this, or just actually doing something to commemorate the tragic losses that occurred on that day.
And as a new generation is exposed to 9/11, Yeager says to remember to talk to your children, help them work through any feelings that may come up.
That was Christine Persichetti reporting. If you need help coping on this anniversary or at any other time, Catholic Charities is here for you. Just call 718-722-6001 to find a mental health clinic near you or visit their website, ccbq.org. A former flight attendant is handling his grief by recalling his colleagues who lost their lives on Flight 175. He's pushing hard to see to it that they're hailed as heroes. And Lee Druby has his story.
Paul Venito's life is a miracle, a gift, and he's using it to honor his lost friends. Back on September 10th, 2001, Paul was a crew member on United Flight 175. After landing in Boston, he left the airport. The next day, a new crew boarded that same plane. They never made it home. It was hijacked and flown into the Twin Towers on 9/11. Now Paul is pushing a beverage cart over 200 miles from Logan Airport in Boston to Ground Zero, ending the trip on the 20th anniversary. It's the flight path 175 took on that fateful day, an emotional and physical feat, relying on his Catholic faith and friendships to get through. In the cart, a reminder of who he's doing this for.
I mean, I loved working with these people. They were great people. They were just nice to be around.
Colleagues, but also friends, the crew members who lost their lives.
You know, they were the first responders of 9/11. They should have been recognized as American heroes. That's the way I feel. And it bothered me that they never got that recognition because they left families behind.
In the Bronx, Emily Druby, Currents News.
Still to come on Currents News, we'll introduce you to the first responder turned author who's teaching the day we'll never forget to those too young to remember it firsthand. School children taking part in a history they didn't live, a day that changed their lives even before they were born. Divine Wisdom Catholic Academy in Douglaston takes the time each year to dedicate a special prayer service in memory of all those who died in the attack and those who continue to succumb to 9/11 illnesses. Meanwhile, student council members at Holy Cross High School in Flushing, Queens, cleaned and planted flowers around their memorial ahead of this somber anniversary. The plaque names the 17 alumni from Holy Cross who died on 9/11. The school spruces up the memorial every year with all grades taking part. The events of that day and everything that happened since is a hard story to tell, but it's one we have to. We, as a nation, promise to never forget, and now it's our mission to teach those who will never remember. One Port Authority police officer has turned his 9/11 story into a book that is inspiring the next generation. Jessica Easthope has that story.
Will Jimeno is an author.
Like I said here, instead our country pulled together like never before.
His stories are about overcoming fear and living your faith, but there's nothing fictional about them. He did both on September 11th, 2001.
I always say, well, if God left me on this earth for a reason, is as a survivor, it's my responsibility and obligation to help other people. It shows you me as an immigrant.
But get this, one of his 9/11 books is for kids. Immigrant, American Survivor is about that day, his journey to the U.S. from Colombia, and his Catholic upbringing.
My actual police ID and shield.
In the years following 9/11, Will was asked to talk to young students who were afraid to fly, and his speaking engagements evolved into a message: never give up.
And how do I talk to kids about the darkest day in U.S. history? And I think it just came from my heart. I had the same trials and tribulations as every other child. So what I want people to understand is I am no different than them. The actual collapse happening.
In the children's book, you see the true story of Jimeno, a Port Authority police officer, trapped, crushed beneath the World Trade Center's 220 stories of concrete and steel.
One of the things I've always done to my wife and my daughter was the sign language, I love you. So I took both my hands, I crossed them over my chest because I figured I was going to die. Hopefully they'll find me like this and be able to tell my wife I was thinking about her. When they found us.
After 13 hours, he was only one of two people pulled alive from underneath the collapse. To the world who watched in horror on that day, 9/11 was a tragedy. But for Will, he's been able to take the good with the bad.
You know, Jesus died for us. If we just look that they nailed him on the cross, then it's just a tragedy. It's not a tragedy because he gave his life for us. On 9/11, I don't look at what the terrorists did. I look at all the good that day.
That's a lesson he hopes to pass on to the next generation. Jessica Easthope, Currents News.
You can buy Jimeno's children's book, Immigrant American Survivor, on Amazon. Paperback and digital editions are available. And that is this special edition of Currents News. I'm Michelle Powers. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. In honor of this somber anniversary, we leave you with some of the memorials around the Diocese of Brooklyn, permanent promises that we will never forget.
Dennis Lawrence Devlin.
Gerard P. Dewan.
Suleimanali Kasamali Danani.
Michael Louis D'Agostino.
Matthew Diaz. Nancy Diaz.
Timothy M. Stackpole.
Richard James Stadelberger.
Eric Adam Stallman.
Gregory Stipe.
Alexandru Liviu Stein.
Corina Stan.